Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Going In Tight, Coming Out Loose podcast series, NASCAR Storied. In this series, we will highlight different topics that have shaped the sport that we all know and love. Many will delve into the history and some will look at common discussions that take place in the sport. As always, our goal here at Going In Tight, Coming Out Loose is to broaden our knowledge, the knowledge of current fans, and help show new fans why this sport is so great and the history that made it what it is today. This installment of NASCAR Storied is whiskey bent and title bound. We hope you enjoy. Let me start this out by leveling with you guys a little bit. Have you ever made a big beer run? Maybe grabbing 7 or 8 cases of beer? Hell, for you weekend warriors like I was in college, you may be supplying the party with liquid courage, and let's say you grab 10 cases of beer. That would be a whopping 22.5 gallons of alcohol. Sounds like a lot, wouldn't you say? I'm going to take you back in history and show you something that shaped NASCAR, and we'll see if you still have that same opinion. Let me first take you back to December 17th, 1917. The 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed in the House of Representatives. This amendment was the result of years of efforts by the temperance movement. This amendment was designed to limit the consumption of intoxicating liquors. Imagine for a moment, as you take a step back, that 8 days prior to Christmas, you look at your Twitter feed and see that Congress has passed a bill that tells you that you cannot enjoy some spiked eggnog or some spiked cider on Christmas. I can tell you right now, I have an aunt or two that would not be ho-ho-hoing into the holidays. But I digress. Congress passed the bill 282 to 128. Democrats, 141 of them voted yes to this bill and 64 said no. Republicans, 137 of them said yes to this bill, and 62 said no. Independents, they voted 4-2. I don't know what's more stunning here to me. Is it that Democrats and Republicans agreed almost perfectly to ban alcohol, or that there were actually 6 independents in Congress? Nonetheless, the bill passed and went to the Senate, where it again passed 47-8 on the next day, December 18th. The ratification of the amendment was certified on January 29, 1918, and on October 28, 1919, Congress passed legislation called the National Prohibition Act, also known as the Volstead Act. The president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, vetoed it, but as you know, Prohibition happened, so the veto didn't really work out in his favor. Thus, the production, transport, and sale of intoxicating liquors, which included beer, was made illegal. One interesting fact here is that consumption was not illegal. So you've got to riddle me that. How can you produce something, transport it, and sell it, and that be illegal, but then the consumption of it, how are these people getting it? Another rabbit hole that I won't go down. Prohibition lasted 13 years, 1920 to 1933. It is, to this day, the only amendment to be repealed. Prohibition gave way to what for many would become a family business, moonshining. Although Prohibition was repealed in 1933, new federal tax law kept those who had made their living off of selling moonshine from obeying the rules. Why give money back to the government that had taken your livelihood and then wanted to give you back your livelihood at a heftier price? This led to a need for speed. Moonshiners had been taking streetcars and souping them up to outrun the law for years. Remember the beer run I talked about earlier? 10 cases, which amounted to about a tick over 22 gallons? Well, moonshiners were running north of 100 gallons in their cars, sometimes as much as 180 gallons of whiskey at a time. Nearly 800 pounds of alcohol loaded into a Dodge Coronet, an Oldsmobile Rocket 88, a Chevy Coupe, or the very popular Ford Model A Coupe that had a V8 engine. These cars had suspensions and engines that were easily modifiable without the changes being noticed by local law enforcement. I'm gonna take another step aside. Does this sound familiar to you guys? tinkering with an engine, a suspension, or the body of a car to gain an advantage doesn't sound like the strictly stock cars that we are used to. We'll tackle that issue later. Moonshiners needed cars that could navigate back roads, haul heavy loads, and most importantly, outrun law enforcement. Bootleggers were having to not only be the racers, but the mechanics as well. It wasn't long before these drivers had figured out their skills translated to racing. In the 1930s, when Prohibition was phasing out, these whiskey runners began to test their grit at the local tracks, finding out that people would come by the hundreds and at times the thousands to watch them showcase their racing skills. Moonshiners were making their way into organized racing. Speedways had popped up all over the country by the 1940s, and in 1949, Bill France Sr. created the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing, also known as NASCAR. Now you will see, whiskey is the tie that binds. At 14 years old, Raymond Parks left his home in North Georgia to begin an apprenticeship as a moonshiner. He had been locked up for buying hooch for his dad at 14 years old. Yes, at 14 years old. He left his home, started moonshining, and he had also been locked up at this point. Parks became very successful at running his own still and bootlegging. He started to move his money to more legitimate business enterprises, opening service stations, mechanic shops, and putting together what is now recognized as one of the first legitimate racing teams. Parks' less legitimate business dealing did follow him around though. His team got banned from Lakewood Speedway in Atlanta because they had all been convicted of liquor hauling violations. Although they won the race that they started at Lakewood Speedway with a driver who had no driver's license because he had been arrested in excess of 16 times, they still weren't invited back for future races. In 1949, the Drivers' Championship was awarded to Red Byron. Byron drove for none other than Raymond Parks. However, Parks' time in the organized sport was limited. Big Bo France, as he would come to be known, began distancing the sport from its moonshine roots, trying to make it a family-friendly sport like baseball or football. Now, it may seem the closest thing to bootlegging NASCAR has is an infield full of drunk folks, and I've been one of them. But there are some things that time can erase. Though Parks had left NASCAR, there was another young man making his way into racing, a young man by the name of Robert Glenn Johnson Jr. At 14 years old, this seems like a popular age for moonshiners, the 14 years old. I remember at 14 years old, I was just worrying if I could finish my homework in time enough to ride my bike to my friend's house. But I digress again. A young man by the name of Robert Glenn Johnson Jr. at 14 years old began running his father's moonshine. You all may know Robert Glenn Johnson by his more frequently used name, Junior Johnson. In 1953, Junior Johnson made his debut at Darlington Raceway, and by 1955, he had a full-time career as a NASCAR driver. However, he still continued running that whiskey. This led to Johnson spending 11 months in prison from 1956 to 1957. Johnson returned to the sport after his incarceration to win 50 races as a driver. He notched 148 top 10s, and he went on to own his own team where his drivers amassed 132 wins, and he won 6 championships as an owner. 3 of those championships came from Cale Yarborough, and another 3 from Darrell Waltrip. Other drivers who drove for Johnson included Bobby Allison, Terry Labonte, Sterling Marlin, Jeffrey Bodine, Bill Elliott, and a few more. Following his team's final championship in 1985, President Ronald Reagan granted Johnson a presidential pardon for his conviction in 1955. This restored one of his most basic human rights, the right to vote. Johnson and Parks aren't the only guys who were steeped in moonshine. Benny Parsons and Lee Petty are 2 other big names who took their ability to whip flawless bootleg turns and put that skill on the track. NASCAR did continue to distance itself from its moonshine roots. However, Junior Johnson couldn't let the taste of the family recipe die. In 2007, in partnership with Piedmont Distillers in North Carolina, Junior Johnson created the Old Family recipe, which is now available in all 50 states under the name Midnight Moon. Today, NASCAR has begun to embrace its embattled past. In the Hall of Fame, there's a bootlegging exhibit where Raymond Parks' name will forever be enshrined. And Junior Johnson, an owner for the ages, will live there too. And he will continue to live on under the light of Midnight Moon whiskey. The two characters we've highlighted today are pivotal in making NASCAR what it has become. Raymond Parks was the first person to formalize a NASCAR team, and he won the first NASCAR championship as an owner. Junior Johnson, one of the most storied characters in NASCAR history, has won not only as a driver but as an owner, and has gone on to affect the lives of some of the biggest names in the sport today. Is this the brightest point in our sports history? No, but it needs to be highlighted because it guided and it fueled some of our biggest and brightest stars and shaped what the sport is today. Junior Johnson passed away on December 20th, 2019, almost a year ago to date. Johnson died while he was in hospice care and was suffering from Alzheimer's disease at the time. We wanted to dedicate this first installment of NASCAR Storied to this legend and hero of the sport that we all know and love. We thank you all so much for tuning in to the first installment of the Get Cole podcast special series, NASCAR Storied. We're going to be bringing you more stories throughout the season that highlight the history, current events, and some of the hot topics that need to be discussed within our sport. We hope that you subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on Spotify, and you can find us on any major podcasting platform. You can go to our website, goingintightpodcast.com, and share this story with others who might like to hear it. You can also follow us on social media at goingintight_pod on Twitter and on Instagram. We will talk to you all again soon. In the meantime, enjoy your holidays and have a happy new year.